Holy moly, we've had our point changes. Warhammer community have released the point changes which are going to be active for the Warzone Nephilim chapter approved book. So there's going to be a lot of point changes today, so I hope you're ready for them. Almost all of the units in the actual codex in fact have had some sort of point changes, as well as the Cryptic Arcana as well. Now I know I'm a day late with this update, that's what happens when your tyre blows on your car. Those of you in the Discord, you know what I'm talking about. Shout out to you guys. But before we get into the video guys, just remember to like and subscribe so we can keep pumping out the latest Necron content. Okay, so let's begin with the HQ selections. There's a lot of point changes here, starting off with Amrakir the Traveller. Now he's dropped down to 130 points, down from 140 points, so a nice 10-point reduction there. He is a named character of course, so not a bad place to begin. Next in the list we've got the CATACOMB Command Barge. This is also 10 points cheaper, now only 145 points. All the rest of the war gear however has remained the same, but that Command Barge is now 145, which makes it a lot more affordable, especially in your smaller games there. Okay, on to one of the Cryptechs, which is the CHRONOMANCER. Down from 80 points, he is now 75 points, so a nice little 5-point reduction for a Cryptech model. That's what we like to see. Now a CHRONOMANCER is quite frequently used within our lists, and with that Dynastic Advisor's ability, maybe we can squeeze an additional Cryptech model in to our games, providing that we've got a Noble on the table of course. Now his Entropic Lance has remained the same, it's still 10 points. I always take the Lance, I think it's pretty decent for a single shot Strength 8 weapon that does D3 plus 3 damage, so an average of 5 damage there. Next we've got Illuminazares. So when we got a lot of units that gained the core keyword recently, Illuminazares became quite a little bit of a beast. However, he's still too pricey and it was always better to just take 2 Technomancers. Now as far as his cost is concerned, he's 145 points. Down from 160, so he's got a 15-point reduction there. But as you'll see further into the HQ selections, the Technomancer has actually gone down as well, but we'll get onto that in a bit. Let's keep working our way down the list. Next we've got IMOTEKH the Stormlord. Now if you are playing the Celtic Dynasty, IMOTEKH the Stormlord is almost an auto include because he brings you 2 command points before the game even begins because he's your warlord. And as you know with this new Nephilim book, you start off with much less command points at the beginning of the battle. So gaining 2 at the start of the battle because you've got IMOTEKH is much better, and of course when he's 15 points cheaper than he used to be at 130 points, you can't go wrong with that. On to the Locust Lord. Previously was 105 points, he's now 100 points, so he's gone down by 5 points. Not too big of a deal there. He's not a commonly used character anyway because he lacks a noble keyword, so squeezing him into list is quite difficult. The rest of his war gear hasn't changed, it's still 5 for the Phylactery and 30 points for the Resurrection Orb, but a nice little 5-point reduction for the Locust Lord. Very similarly, the Necron Lord, he's gone down 5 points as well, but there's a little extra reduction in terms of his war gear. He could take a Resurrection Orb for only 25 points, not 30 points. So if you wanted a cheap orb carrier, the Necron Lord's your man, except of course he doesn't have that in-run save, so maybe you want to go for an Overlord. Depends how you're playing and depends on how tight you are with the points. On to another named character, which is NEMESOR ZAHNDREKH. Was 135 points, he's now 125 points, so a reduction of 10 points. I don't really use him to be honest with you. However, that counter tactics ability can come quite in handy. It's just a shame that your opponent doesn't actually lose those command points when he denies them using a stratagem for one battle round. Another named character, Orokin the Diviner. He was 110 points, he is now 100 points. He's still a pretty poor choice in my opinion. Doesn't really bring too much to the table, other than the fact that he can give an in-run save to try out Praetorians, but he's only moving 5 inches, so he's not even really keeping up with them in the first place. I can't see Orokin the Diviner being selected that often. On to the generic Overlord. He is now 90 points, so that's a reduction of 5 points. And also the Resurrection Orb that he can carry has also gone down by 5 points, very similar to the Necron Lord. So it's 25 points for the Resurrection Orb, and then furthermore the Void Scythe is now only 10 points, it used to be 15. So if you want that strength 10 weapon with the minus 4 AP 3 damage, it's only going to be costing you 10 points as opposed to 15. I thought 15 was too pricey anyways, so this is a pretty good change in my opinion. Next we've got a couple more Cryptechs. The first one is the Plasmancer. He's now 65 points, he was previously 70 points, so he's got a 5-point reduction there. I think a lot of our Necron players quite like the Plasmancer. I don't use him that often if I'm honest anymore. I used to at the start of the edition, but not so much anymore. But now he's got 5 points less. Throwing out mortal wounds with his abilities, that's not a bad option there, especially when you pair it to some of the Cryptic Arcana, which we'll go over in a bit as well. The Psychomancer is next, he's also 65 points, so that's another 5-point reduction there. Do I see the Psychomancer being used now? Not really, if I'm honest with you. I don't like the ability that it has, the Harbinger of Despair. Only being a 12-inch range doesn't work for me, and if you really want to half your opponent's advance and charge rolls, you can get a Chronomancer and take the counter-temporal nanomines, which, a little spoiler, has also been reduced. We'll get onto that in a bit too. Okay, onto the Royal Warden, which is now 70 points. so another little saving of 5 points. Maybe he can make his way back into our list again, especially if you're going Necron Warrior heavy. You don't want your Necron Warriors with the Gorse Reapers stuck in combat, so your Royal Warden is a nice cheap way of getting them out. The Scorbit Lord has not seen any change. He's still 130 points unfortunately. I think he's a little bit too pricey for me to be using, so there's no movement there. As for the Technomancer, which makes most people's list nowadays, he has gone down by 5 points to 70 points. I actually thought he was going to go up in points because he's pretty decent, bringing back a Locust Heavy Destroyer for example, but he's gone down to 70 points. Also, the Canoptic Control node has gone from 15 points to 10 points. So not the Canoptic Cloak, that's still 5 points, but the Canoptic Control node, so Dynasty core units within 6 inches gets a +1 to the hit roll. Next, we've got another named character, kind of made a little bit of a comeback in this chapter approved, purely because of his ability, Ancient Collector, to be able to bring a relic free of charge by using the Dynastic Heirloom stratagem. When you first use this stratagem, it's free to use for the first time using it when you've got Trazyn the Infinite in your list. Now he was 100 points, he has now gone down to 90 points. So he's still costing the exact same as an Overlord. I think he's a pretty decent choice now. Still has the My Will Be Done ability and the Relentless March aura. So yeah, not a bad one there. Then the final one is Vargard Oberon. Very rarely do I see this model in play. He's of course from the Saltec dynasty. He's gone from 100 points down to 90 points. Now I think that should have gone down even further if you ask me. You rarely see him play as mentioned, but it is what it is. So before getting on to the troops, let's move on to the Cryptic Arcana. We're going to briefly talk about this. Basically all of the Cryptic Arcana has gone down by 5 points. Now, are they too expensive? Now, for me personally, I still think some of them are a little bit too expensive still, even after this 5-point reduction. Or some of them are just never going to get chosen, if you ask me. But it's still nice to see that they've got a reduction, they've gone the right way. So let's move on to the troops. Now, first of the troops is the Immortals. The Immortals have gone down from 17 points per model to 16 points per model. Now, that 1 point difference may not seem like a lot, but if you've got a unit of 5, that's of course 5 points. If you've got a unit of 10, that's 10 points. These points will start to add up, so effectively we've gained a minimum of 5 points from your Immortals there. I personally take Immortals in virtually every list I take, just for scoring some secondary objectives, whether it's the backline objectives. If I'm playing the Nethrith dynasty, I can deep strike them with the stratagem, and as they're troops with objectives secured, they're able to do a lot of secondaries within your own turn as well. But it's nice that we've gained a few extra points from our troop choices. Now as for the Necron Warriors, they are still 13 points per model, and you still need to take a minimum of 10 of them. Now of course they work much better in groups of 20, so if you are taking that 20, that's going to be 260 points for those warriors, so no movement there. I thought they might go down to 12, but it is what it is. Let's move on to the elite sections. Now the elite sections, you're going to get quite surprised, because all of the Catan shards have gone down to pretty much what I predicted when I did that 20 changes video that we did recently. So the Deceiver has gone down to 300 points, down from 350 points. The Nightbringer is now 320, that's also a 50 point reduction, and the Void Dragon is also at 300 points, so that's another 50 point reduction there. Now I think I personally would have liked to seen the Deceiver gone to 280. I don't think it's better than the Void Dragon. If I had the option of selecting either the Void Dragon or the Deceiver, I'm taking the Void Dragon virtually every time. Now of course the Deceiver does have its tricks with the deployment. That could also save us points with strategic reserves. And of course command points are now quite rare, especially at the start of the game, so maybe that's what their thinking is in terms of giving it only the 50 point reduction there. Now the Plasma Sight, that's still 15 points, and the Canoptic Reanimator, that's still 80 points, so there's no movement there. Same applies to the Canoptic Spiders and the Cryptothralls, so neither of those gained any points reductions there. The Death Marks, however, they did get a big points reduction in my opinion. They were 18 points per model, they are now 15 points per model, and you're pretty much always taking them in units of 10. So when you're gaining 3 points per model, that's a whopping 30 points reduction for the full unit of 10 of them. These are going to be much more playable, especially with that bodyguard ability being changed to the Lookout Sir ability, and of course these guys with their snipers completely ignore the Lookout Sir rule, so these guys could actually make a little bit of a comeback. Now onto the Flayed ones, no changes there, still 10 points a model. They only recently got a reduction, didn't they? We didn't expect them to go down. However, the HEXMARK Destroyer has gone down 10 points, so he's 65 points. I think that's pretty reasonable for the amount of wounds that he's got, and of course he's a character model, so he can take a relic if you wanted to. Also you can spread out those command protocols for units within 6 inches as well, so 65 I think is pretty reasonable, especially when you're going up against toughness 3 factions that have got a low armor save. So where are we? We're about halfway into these point reductions. I told you there's quite a lot here. Next we've got the Lich Guard. I know a lot of you like using Lich Guard. It's not one of my personal favoured units, but they do have a points reduction. Previously they were 28 points per model, they are now 25 points per model, so very similar to the Death Marks. they've taken a 3-point reduction, so if you're taking 10 of them, a nice whopping 30-point reduction there. Scorpion Destroyers, no changes there. The Transcendent Catan Shard, I don't really use this if I'm honest with you, but he has taken a reduction of 40 points. It previously was 270, it is now 230. Now this Transcendent Catan is actually cheaper than a 20-man Warrior Blob, so if you wanted to take a Catan on the cheap, I suppose that's the way you do it, but it's not one that I tend to take. As for the Triarch Stalker, another one that I don't really use anymore. Very limited in what it can do, but it does have a reduction on its datasheet. It's now only 120 points, whereas it previously was 135. So a nice 15-point reduction with the Triarch Stalker. As for the weapons with the Stalker, no changes there. On to the fast attack, the Canoptic Scarab Swarms haven't changed, the Canoptic Wraiths haven't changed, and nor have the Affinity Destroyers. I thought they might get a little bit of a decrease, but they're still 30 points per model. As for the Tomb Blades, they have taken a decrease. They are now 5 points cheaper than they were. They used to be 25 points, they're now only 20 points, which I think is actually fair because they've only got 2 wounds per model anyway. So I think they were quite squishy before for 25 points. There is also one change within their war gear, which is the Shadow Loom is now only 3 points, whereas it used to be 5 points. So if you want to give them that 5 plus invuln save per model, it's only 3 points. So if you're doing that for a unit of 3 of them, so that's going to save you 6 points in total. Not a big thing, but I like the fact that they've gone down 5 points a model. Triarch Praetorians are next. They are now 22 points per model. They've also come down by 3. They used to be 25 points per model. I personally don't use these guys either. I think they're a bit of a jack of all trades, master of none. They don't get the dynasty buffs and things like that. Or they don't have an invuln save either, but at least they've gained that reduction for you guys that want to use them. Onto the heavy supports. Annihilation Barges are the exact same. I thought that would get a reduction as well, but it didn't. That's still 120 points. The Doomstalker as well as the Doomsday Arc, neither of those got a reduction. I thought both of those would get a reduction in fact, because of that blast keyword built in with their weapons. Almost makes them unpickable when you're making your list, but they're still the same points cost. Now, Locust Destroyers, they've got a huge change. Now, it might be quite subtle and you might not spot it out first, but I'll let you in on it. They previously were 45 points per model, they're now 40 points per model, so they've gone down by 5, but that's not the trick here. The trick is, if you want to get one of the Locust Heavy Destroyers within the unit, which you can, it only costs you an additional 5 points. So that means you're going to have a single Locust Heavy Destroyer for 45 points. Now, when we talk about the next datasheet, which is actually the Locust Heavy Destroyers, they cost you 50 points per model. Now that is a reduction, they used to be 55, they're now 50. But going back to that Locust Destroyer unit that can have one single Heavy Destroyer in there, you can get a single Locust Heavy Destroyer within that unit for 5 points cheaper than the actual Locust Heavy Destroyer unit itself. So this in itself is actually going to make the Locust Destroyers much more usable. And also to add to that, if you remember the rule of 3, you can only have a maximum of 3 units with the same datasheet in Strike Force games. So that's 3 lots of Locust Heavy Destroyer units. But a Locust Destroyer unit is a completely different datasheet, so you can actually hide a Locust Heavy Destroyer within that unit. In fact, you can do it within 3 Locust Destroyer units. So all in all, you can actually have a total of 12 Locust Heavy Destroyers within a single list. So that's the heavy supports. Next we've got the Ghost Ark, which took a massive nerf. You've got to have units embarked inside the Ghost Ark while it's being deployed, otherwise it will simply be destroyed. Now there are ways around this. You can stick a Technomancer in there for example, or another Cryptek model, or even a Scorpion if you want. Then get it out in turn 1 if you wanted to. But as for the point changes for the Ghost Ark, it's gone down by 15 points, so quite a nice reduction. You've just got to fill them before you start the game. As for the flyers, the Doom Scythe has gone down 15 points, so it's only 165 points now. I mean, 180 does seem way too expensive. It's quite a squishy unit. Doesn't have Quantum Shielding. Okay, it is a -1 to hit, but once you start getting your attacks through, it's only toughness 6, only 12 wounds. Now the Night Scythe, that's another one that has a reduction. It's gone down by 10, so it's 120 points now. Now the problem I've got with the Night Scythe is the fact that when you're filling it up with infantry units such as Lich Guard or Scorpion Destroyers, and you're using that Prismatic Dimensional Breach stratagem for a command point as well, once you start putting your melee unit into reserves, then you're using the stratagem on top of that, and maybe you have to even put the flyer in reserves as well. You could be looking at 3 to 4 command points before the game even begins, and of course we don't have that kind of command points anymore to start the game, especially when you're paying for a Warlord trait as well as a relic. So even with 120 points, okay, it is a reduction. I think it needed a bit more than that. On to the Lords of War, before we get onto the fortifications, then the Forge World stuff. So Lords of War, we got the Monolith. It's now only 300 points. 300 points, and don't forget you can take a super heavy auxiliary detachment for free now. You don't have to pay a command point in order to do so. So 300 points does make it quite usable, and don't forget there's a load of stratagems that you can use with the Monolith to be moving your models around. Now the Obelisk is next, which isn't really a favoured unit, is it? It's also 300 points, so that has taken a 30 point reduction as well. I'm not going to select the obelisk if I'm honest with you. So let's move on to the main man himself, the Silent King. Now the Silent King, he was 420 points, which I think was already a reduction from the previous incarnation of this book. He is now only 400 points. Already pretty much an auto include for this book because of the lack of command points. He'll be bringing you 3 command points if he's your warlord, which he will be because of the royal court abilities. So he's going to be your warlord, bringing you 3 command points before the game even begins. He's buffing virtually every unit you've got, including Triumph Praetorians. He's got the double Mine Will Be Done ability because of the Fair Run stuff. He's got the Annihilation Beams, which are strength 12 and damage 6. He's got loads of weapons, not to mention the upgrade to the Code of Combat secondary objective as well, where he can be scoring 4 victory points in melee and gaining new command points if he does it as well. So the Silent King for me is now an absolute bargain at 400 points. Next we've got the Tesseract Bolt. That's also gone down to 400 points. Previously it was 450, so a nice 50 point reduction there. I think it's a common thing with the Lord of War models, going down about 50 points a model. Then the final unit before the Forge World stuff is the Fortification, so the Covenants of Dominion. They were 120, they're now 100 points. I don't think I'm ever going to fill these things, so we're going to move on to the Forge World stuff. So the Tombstalker, still 90 points, no changes there. As for the Canoptic Acanthrites, there's also no changes there as well. However, there is a change for the Tomb Sentinel. There's a 15 points decrease, so he's only 110 points now. I think I prefer this model over the Tombstalker because he's got that strength 10 weapon and a potential of 6 shots with it, although it does have the blast ability attached to the weapon, so it's not something I select too often. But now it's only 110 points. As for the Tesseract Arc, which I do quite like, no changes for that. The Night Shroud Flyer is now 190 points. I don't really rate the Night Shroud if I'm honest with you. Apart from that bombardment, it's not really doing much. It's not a transport option and it doesn't have the big weapon. I'm not taking the Night Shroud. It needed a much bigger decrease than 10 points. Onto the Forge World Lords of War and Fortifications. So you've got the Gorse Pylon. It's 450 points. That's down 25 points. I don't think many of you are taking this, but I'll mention it anyway. Very similar with the Sentry Pylons, they're 100 points a model, no changes there. But the final one, which some of you are interested in, which is the Seraptic Heavy Construct. Now this is 600 points. This has gone down because it used to be 650 points. This one's our big scary thing. It's strength 8, toughness 8, 28 wounds, 5 up in-run save, all the weapons you really need. It's of course quite an expensive model to be bringing, but it's a nice reduction of 50 points there. So all in all, what do I think about these points reductions? Now I've not really looked at the other factions reductions, but I'm presuming that most factions have got their reductions. I know some of them have got an increase, I'm not sure which ones have. But if everybody's got the same sort of reductions, it just means we're getting more models on the tabletop, and pretty much Games Workshop are going to be selling us more models. I mean, yes, okay, we're going to be getting more things within our list that we actually want to take, without having to cut too many things out. But so's your opponent, so it's kind of swings and roundabouts depending how you look at it. But the main standout ones for me were those Catan shards. I mean, especially the Nightbringer, it was just slightly too expensive at 370 points. If it went up against Psycho factions, it just gets smited off the board. 3 in the psychic phase, 3 in the shooting phase, 3 in the fight phase, it was gone within a turn. And then you had to put it in strategic reserve just to protect it, but then that cost you command points to do so. Then of course there was the worry that with this new chapter approved, with the lack of command points to start the game with, how are we going to field our Nightbringers? But at 320 points, you can throw them up the board, scare Carnifex kind of model. I don't have a problem with that now. But yeah, so that's all the point changes. We're going to probably go through this in a little bit more detail in a later video, what it actually means for the Necron Codex as a whole. I just wanted to kind of relay the information out to you. However, this will be available on the Warhammer community website, so you just have to go on there, upload the new points, and they are free to upload. But yeah, guys, let me know what you think in the comments below. What's the biggest positives you can see from this points reduction? In fact, that's a highlight in itself. We don't have any points increases whatsoever. You'll have to let me know which factions and units actually got some points increases, because I've not gone over that yet. So yeah, let me know in the comments below. If you haven't already, like and subscribe. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.